Buggery Act of 1533 was an Act of Parliament during the reign of Henry VIII. The legislation defined sodomy as an unnatural sexual act against the will of God and man. It was punishable by death and remained a capital offence until 1861. In 1861, the Offence Against a Person Act removed the death penalty and replaced it with life imprisonment. Up until this point, only penetrative sex had been illegal. This was until the Labouche Amendment of 1885, which was used to broadly prosecute male homosexuals where sodomy could not be proven. This extended the laws of homosexuality to include any kind of sexual activity between men. Famously, Oscar Wilde was convicted under this law and sentenced to 2 years penal labour. These laws were enforced into the early 20th century, but it wasn't until post-war Britain that there was a surge of police activity in enforcing the laws prohibiting sexual behaviour between men. In 1945, 800 men were prosecuted for homosexuality. A decade later, the number had surged to 2,500, with 4 out of every 10 of them jailed. Alan Turing rightly has become the cause figurehead. A genius whose contribution to the war effort against Nazism may well have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and yet he was persecuted and charged with gross indecency, which was in the same crime category as sexual offences against children. He was chemically castrated in an effort to cure him of his homosexuality. His conviction meant he had his security clearance revoked, and the prejudice ended his career, and it eventually ended his life as he committed suicide. If they did that to war heroes, what hope was there for anyone else? People's lives were wrecked, they were humiliated, they lost their jobs, they lived lives of fear, misery and shame. They felt rejected by their own country. Turing was far from the only victim to take his own life, so why did it take so many decades to pardon those whose lives were destroyed? The British government of post-war Britain were paranoid over the involvement of homosexual men in the war effort. They felt gay men were vulnerable to blackmail by the enemy. However, the men were only subject to blackmail as a result of their fear of being persecuted by the prejudiced British establishment. It is hard to understand their deep-set paranoia and focus on homosexuals when members of their own elite were passing on top-secret information during World War II. For example, Baron William Forbes Sempill, an Air Force pilot who worked in Japan during and post-World War I. He was seen as a war hero by many. However, he was a member of the far right, a fascist, and was involved in anti-Semitic groups during the 1930s. Within all these groups were members of the British established elite. Since the 1920s, Sempill had been giving military secrets to the Japanese, and although his activities were uncovered by British intelligence, Sempill was not prosecuted for spying and allowed to continue in public life, with links to the royal family and Winston Churchill himself. In cases such as this, it is hard to understand how the privileged elite face no punishment for serious crimes, yet homosexuals face persecution for their sexuality, even if they had aided the war effort and technological advancement. More evidence of the elite's power over the British establishment came post-Turing's conviction. In 1953, Edward Montagu, the 3rd Baron Montagu of Belleux, was imprisoned for homosexual indecency, and it caused uproar because of his social status. His social status led to the establishment of a committee to examine a report on law, known as Wolfenden. The Wolfenden Committee helped to decriminalise homosexual acts in private between 2 men, both of whom were over the age of 21. It wasn't until 2003 when the age of consent was lowered to be equal of that of a heterosexual couple. Alan Turing was pardoned of his crimes in August 2014. Alan Turing shouldn't have been pardoned. It is insulting to suggest that he needed to be pardoned. Pardoning someone is to say you didn't do the crime, or we're letting you go for this crime. Alan Turing was a homosexual man, and to call it a crime is wrong. The tribute of a pardon is not fitting. It says that the British state is prepared to forgive historical homosexual acts because they are a national hero. This is the opposite of the correct message. Alan Turing should be forgiven because he did nothing wrong, not because he was a modern legend. The only thing wrong was the venality of the law. It was wrong against Oscar Wilde, it was wrong against Alan Turing, and it was wrong against the other estimated 75,000 other men, no matter of their occupation. The correct response to these pardons is to pay tribute to those who struggled, and to learn from their courage to finish what they started. No gratitude, no triumphalism, only optimism that injustice may be overcome, and determination to defeat it.